think it's time to start. As soon as the last person gets So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for coming. Tonight, I'm going to talk just a little bit about the structure of law, a little bit about history, and I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a historian. What I am is a concerned citizen, just like every one of you. And I would say I'm an increasingly concerned citizen, based on various trends that we'll be talking about. And so I've just set out to begin to educate myself, as we all do in our ways, about some of the particular challenges we're facing now. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, and also some solution. So the words on the screen, the three big words are, of course, the first three words of the Constitution of the United States. And that's what we're going to be focusing on, the people, which harkens back to the founding of our country, based on the rights of the people for self-determination and for self-governance. And the other words on the screen have to do with corporations. And what's been happening, as we're all aware, over many years actually, is the growth, the extreme growth in the rights of corporations, and at the same time, the loss of the rights of individual people and communities. So that's the topic, as I said, in addition to solutions. So, just background. Virtually all of the kind of things I'll be talking about are talked about by this man, Thomas Lindsay. How many of you saw Thomas one way or another? Almost everybody. That's great. Well, it was incredibly inspiring to me and to many others. And as you probably know, he's been working for about 20 years now in the field of community rights organizing and activism. He's a lawyer, founded CELDEF. And he continues to work all over the country on a pro bono basis, he and his relatively large organization, on a pro bono basis to both organize and educate and actually to defend ordinances and laws that are passed under his inspiration. The other gentleman, come on. I just got this app that's supposed to control my PowerPoint, but doesn't, yeah.
I can't read that up there. What does CEL stand for?
Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. It's kind of funny they call it a fund.
You can set up in front for some chairs. Did you just send me a text?
So the other person is Paul Cienfuegos, who's also been working for about 20 years in the field of community rights. He's based on the West Coast. CELDEF is based in Pennsylvania. And Paul has been organizing, as I said, and the two groups came together, and now they work as partners very closely. Paul often comes into a town first, often it works this way, and has an intensive seminar on community rights organizing. And then the people get inspired, and then they often bring in Thomas Lindsay and his crew of incredible organizers and lawyers. So these guys are the inspiration for this. So what's come out of their work? Directly out of their work, 160 different communities across the country in 9 states have passed community rights ordinances of one kind or another. And by community rights ordinances, I mean ordinances or local laws that directly challenge and redefine the nature of the rights of the communities, emphasizing the rights of the people and directly denying certain corporate rights, and at the same time banning some sort of negative activity in the area. And generally, these ordinances all begin with a specific problem. There's something going on in the community that the people find unacceptable, whether it be a CAFO, the intrusions of CAFOs, whether it be fracking, water privatization, various factors of the GMOs, and so forth. It's driven by the will of the people to be able to say no to something that they find to be harmful or intrusive or damaging to their welfare or their health. That's what drives the process. But the focus of the strategy that we're talking about is not on the problem so much. The problem is the origin of the activity, but the focus is on the rights of the people. It's to decide what's best for their own health and welfare. And as I said, in almost every case of these issues, it happened to have been corporations who were responsible for bringing the harms that the people were objecting to. And the corporations and not the people are the ones who have been protected by our systems of law. But this is not an anti-corporate movement. It's not like we're targeting corporations as intrinsically evil or something. It's an anti-corporate rule movement, because that's a fair way of describing what's going on. It's an anti-corporate rights movement. There are rights that do not belong to corporations that have in fact been given to them. And it's an anti-corporate personhood movement. That's the ultimate of the evolution of the rights of corporations, that they have been deemed to be persons in many important ways in US law. What it is a pro-democracy movement and a local rights movement. That's the focus. So just some history quickly about what's been going on for those of you who don't know or want to have a quick review with corporations in our country. Well, even before our country. Corporations became extremely powerful on the world stage, especially based in England with crown corporations and royal charter corporations. These are some of the companies that we're familiar with from grade school history, like the East India Company, which ruled India and other colonies of the British Empire. It was actually a corporation or a charter company of the British of Britain. And the 13 US colonies were formed and run by corporations, by charter companies based in Britain. So you had the Massachusetts Bay Company, for instance. That was what formed the colony of Massachusetts. So there's a long history from our tradition of corporations having a massive amount of power. Now, interestingly enough, in the Declaration of Independence, you know, there's the first part that everyone knows about our unalienable rights and so forth. But then what comes in the Declaration is a list, a fairly long list, of grievances that the revolutionaries had with British rule. The very first one on the list he's talking about the king here. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. So there was a structure in place there, which was one of the bases of the American Revolution, that these entities, which are essentially were corporations, were set up so that what the public needed and wanted was refused for the benefit of the corporation. Then, at the time of the Revolution, around 1776, was drafted the Articles of Confederation, which we all know a little bit about from history, but not much because it was supplanted by the Constitution. But the Articles of Confederation were an organization of government where the localities, particularly the states, had much more control about what was going to happen in their environment. And corporations were explicitly chartered by these local bodies only for the public good. They had extremely limited rights, extremely constrained sandbox that they could play in, and it was governed essentially by the people. Unfortunately, well, at least for this particular story, the articles were deemed to be too weak in a lot of ways. And so what we had, actually quite a few years later, was the Constitution, which was extremely much stronger for the federal government and also laid the groundwork for a great deal of rights to be mined in it for the sake of the corporations. Just as a side point, the Articles of during the time of the Articles of Confederation, which lasted from 1776 until, what? 1789, when it was, the Constitution finally came in. There was no president.
That's a family study.
There was no president, strong executive body, and there were no federal courts whatsoever to decide things at that high level. So the federal courts were created, and they were, as you know, completely insulated from the public, completely. What they say rules, especially when you're talking about the Supreme Court. What those ladies and gentlemen say is the final law of the land. And there are individual people insulated from the public. There's reasons for this. I'm not trying to say that the balance of power doesn't have some very strong advantages, but these courts were targeted specifically as a means to enhance the rights of corporations. The corporations found that they could appeal to the courts in the right ways based on the Constitution and gain a tremendous amount of rights. And in 1803, the Supreme Court basically gave themselves the power of judicial review, which means that power where they can decide everything in terms of what's legal and what isn't. Now, starting back in the 1870s, the Supreme Court started eroding the states' rights based on the strong cases made by corporate lawyers, and that started a cascade. There were just hundreds of examples of finding rights for corporations in what's called the Commerce Clause in the Constitution, that for the sake of commerce, you cannot interfere with this, you cannot interfere with this, you cannot interfere with this. And they found more and more bases for that, and they strengthened the armor. And in a sense, the court became a wish fulfillment machine for corporate lawyers. They had a wish to strengthen the corporations, and they could find things in the Constitution and use the courts to make that the law of the land. So, this was amazing to me, that we talk about corporate personhood as if it was something that was just invented a couple of years ago with Citizens United. Some people think that. I probably did. But actually it goes back to 1886 when the court really started making decisions based on the fact that these entities should be treated as persons. So it's a 130, 40-year history that this has been building. And so lawyers began to look for the word person all over the Constitution. It's used all over, of course, and once they had a direct link into that concept that they too had personhood, then the lawyers began to find more and more specific rights that they could be granted, including property rights, free speech as in Citizens United, based on our fundamental right to free speech. That's how Citizens United was based. Citizens United, of course, being the decision that allowed corporations to donate unlimited funds in political campaigns. So the corporations have been expanding the categories of what's legal and expanding their rights. They're working on the structure and the meaning of the law and just solidifying the position. The people, meanwhile, have focused on regulatory measures, specific regulatory measures to try to regulate the harms that they wish they could do away with. That's a very different level to be working at, especially because the corporations exert a tremendous amount of control over the regulatory agencies as a rule. They often populate their boards, and they have a great deal of influence on the process. So regulation. Regulation is not preventing harm. It's just trying to regulate it to whatever extent they can. Regulation is asking, how much harm is safe? How much can we take? How much can we stand? Working within the boundaries that have been defined by others. To regulate something is to allow it. You don't regulate something that is disallowed. And we always have permits. There's CAFO permits, there's fracking permits. To permit allows a certain degree of harm by its very nature. And also, you don't protest or seek to regulate something that is a subordinate institution. And as I said, in the early days of our republic, corporations were subordinate institutions to the people and to the local governments, or at least the state governments. And when they were subordinate, they could only work within the will of the people who had chartered them, which is us. Now they're no longer subordinate institutions, and so that's why we take the posture of protesting and requesting and regulating. So one way of looking at this is that there's a cage of available remedies that we've been stuck in. And by we, I don't just mean the poor masses of people, all of us. It also has something to say about those who have been fighting corporate intrusions and corporate harms in a variety of ways, but they often stay within the cage that has been defined for them. And the cage is that we believe that we can only enforce state regulations, we can only lobby the regulatory agencies, we can only work with the corporations trying to get them voluntarily to agree to certain things about their conduct. And what happens is that this cage is formed by the fact that there's these external pressures that are brought to bear on the possible remedies. One is this incredibly strong legal tradition of corporate rights. Another is, as I said, the Commerce Clause and the Contracts Clause of the Constitution, which are continually invoked to support the activities of corporations. Then there's something, I won't go into it, you all know a lot about it anyway, but the idea of state preemption and something called Dillon's Rule, where the states have the ability. Now the states have taken on a certain position where they too are at odds with the local communities. They have gained, strengthened in their power and then there as well, so that they have the ability, if a local area wants to say no to some activity, the state can say yes, and they win. They can preempt every local community and their decisions. And then there's also a fundamental notion around these subjects that nature is property. It's a resource. Somebody owns it, somebody can take it, somebody can make use of it. So breaking out of the cage, 5 years ago or so, the strategy shifted. Now, Lindsay, like I said, Lindsay and others have been working for a long time, but for many of those years, they were pursuing somewhat different strategies. And only 5 years ago or so did they shift and focus on a new way of addressing all these things that we've been talking about. And the new strategy, it's not so much about banning something or fighting something, it's more about rights explicitly. It's a frontal assault on the structures of law that are blocking our self-governing authority. So what can we do? Many people saw that there was no way to make a difference because of all these incredibly strong forms of interference that have been set up to protect corporate activity. The system was rigged, in other words. Some people feel apathy or kind of hopeless about it. So here's an example of somebody who didn't feel that way. This is one of the earliest cases. In 2000, in Wells Township, Pennsylvania, there was a huge CAFO that was planned to come into their area. And many of the residents, let's say the majority of the residents, did not want that to happen, didn't want that to damage the quality of their life there. And so they worked with CELDF, Thomas Lindsay and his group, who are also in Pennsylvania. And the available options at the time were just to try to hold it off, to block the permits, to interfere, delay the inevitable from a certain point of view. Talk about the manure management plan, whether they had done enough, followed it properly and so forth. And the local people said, we don't call that a win. If we follow that strategy, that is not giving us what we need. We need to stop this thing. So CELDF said, I'm sorry, this is all a matter of what they call settled law. That is, it's done. It's baked in to the Constitution as interpreted and other forms of law. It's settled law, there's not much we can do. We could draft an ordinance, but it would be illegal and unconstitutional. And the people said, let's go for it. And they passed it unanimously by the county supervisors. And that was the beginning of this 190 community efforts that we talked about. So there's a new paradigm. Rather than being inside that cage where you can only do what you're allowed to do and fight by and work according to their rules, this is one way of looking at the way CELDF and their groups work on ordinances. So there's a number of concentric circles you could imagine. So first, you declare first, up front, the inherent rights of the people. You don't just come in and say, we want to stop this, we disagree with this, we refuse this. You talk about the rights of the people, you ground it in that. You ground it directly in the constitutions of every one of the 50 states, and of course the US Constitution, that talk about the people having ultimate governing authority. Then you explicitly say that the corporation loses its right to interfere with our rights. They cannot interfere with our fundamental rights. Then you say state preemption does not apply. So you're still talking about rights all the way around. You haven't even talked about the issue yet. You're laying this fundamental groundwork. And in some cases, it's also argued that nature has rights, explicitly, which is another form of rights discussion. And then inside all of that, you put the ban. So you say, in the ban there, for instance, in Wells County, no new CAFOs in Wells County or in Jefferson County. And the ban is insulated and it's surrounded by rights. And so this is this fantastic strategy that they have finally evolved, and it took them years really to do it. It seems, in a way, it seems obvious, like everything does. That's a good idea, but it took some time. So then the question is, won't the corporations fight back? Well, the short answer, of course, is yes, they will, and they do sometimes. But in order to fight these ordinances, the corporations have no choice but to deny the rights of the people directly and head on, because that's the way explicitly the ordinance was laid out. You can't just sort of blow off an ordinance. You have to respond. If you're going to sue something, you have to respond to it in the terms that it presented. And so they're forced to do that. And so CELDF welcomes lawsuits. Luckily, they also are willing to defend them pro bono, or at least to assist in their defense in a significant way, without charge to the communities that run into these lawsuits. They welcome them because it'll bring to light the skewed system of our laws, and hopefully lead to, over time, as more and more of these things come to light, public outrage. So it's paradigm shift organizing. It's not so much anymore just a specific issue organizing, like we want this, we don't want this. So the bigger problem isn't CAFOs. CAFOs are a big problem, but you could say the bigger problem facing our country is not CAFOs. It's the system of law that enables corporations to impose CAFOs where they're not wanted, to impose them with or without our consent. And so if we're to stop CAFOs, for instance, we need to change the system itself, ultimately. And we do need a no CAFOs movement, but we can't really have one until we launch a democracy movement. So community rights ordinances, here's what they do, and this is kind of just a review. They enshrine the right of a local community to protect its own health and welfare. They directly enshrine that. They strip corporations, a corporation of its constitutional rights, and the states of their right to preempt the localities. So again, those two steps. And then there's a ban on certain corporate activities. So what we have is, first, define the rights, proclaim the rights, and the rights are well grounded. We're not making them up out of thin air. And then stop the harm. I'm not saying we do this as two steps in time. It's all part of the same ordinance, part of the same law, but that's the way it's structured. Now, Pittsburgh is another example. In 2010, they had a city ordinance, and they declared that we have a right to safe water, and that we have a right to self-government. And then they also banned fracking in the city of Pittsburgh. And it was a 7-0 vote of the city council. So they were the first major city to ban fracking. Now you might think there's no fracking in the city of Pittsburgh, but there is the opportunity of fracking, given the kind of geology that they have in Pennsylvania. So what they declared is that all living beings have a right to safe water. And we have to ban fracking because it violates that right. Not because we don't like fracking. I mean, we don't. But it's because it violates a right that no one can take away from us. Other communities have done other rights, have pursued other rights, of course. Sustainable energy future, the right to a healthy food supply. The rights are diverse, and they're very powerful, and different communities have of course, chosen different ones. Then in Moore County, New Mexico, in spring, just last year, again, they proclaimed the right to water, safe water, and self-governance. And they're the first county in the United States, an entire county, to ban fracking in its entire territory. And this is the chairman of the Decorah County Board of Commissioners, who said, "The Mora Bill of Rights finally asserts in law the democracy that many of us thought we already had." They're being very bold in Mora County in New Mexico, and they need support. Unfortunately, or fortunately in a way, because it's part of the game plan, they've been sued twice now already, in November and then just now in February. In February by a subsidiary of Shell Oil. So they're facing these lawsuits, and they have voted unanimously to defend their Bill of Rights, which is the ordinance essentially. They're not buckling. And of course, CELDEF is going to assist, and they'll have other forms of assistance. Who knows how this particular case will go? But they're fighting the fight. And why? If you read John Olivas is great, and he writes these opinions about what's going on down there. And you might wonder why. Here's the pragmatic view. You're a county board of supervisors. The people are getting concerned about something, they want to stop it. And they come up with an ordinance and they give it to the supervisors. And the supervisors go, yeah, they might even say, yeah, that's really great if we could do that, but we can't. If we do that, they're going to sue our asses. You know, they're going to come at us with guns blasting, and then they could just collapse and say, we can't do it. And of course, the county attorney will tell them they can't do it. But what some of these 160 communities have done is what's firing them more than the fear that they might have of a fight on their hands, or the pragmatic advice of their county attorney, whose job it is to advise them that they're going to get sued if they're going to get sued. Much more important than that to them is the fire in their belly about their rights, about self-determination, about to decide what they want for their community, and that's more important than any of these other considerations. So that's what drives these kind of people. But they're saying this is really important, especially when you look at the long-term trend that's going on here. It's not just that one little community might get fracked. It's the trend that we have had growing more and more of corporate rule or corporate rights trumping ours. So there's a very big thing at stake here. And that's what drives these people to take the risk and to join the fight. So this whole activity then goes in 3 phases. First of all, it's local. Local community rights is the focus, local community action. You know, you have to organize, and that's something that's not easy, political organizing. You have to educate the people. And then you have to pass your ordinances and your local laws. And then you have to defend those ordinances and laws. It's not over just because you have that immediate success. And then phase 2 is at the statewide level, because it's not just, it starts local, because that's where the people are. But then the next step is statewide action. There's something formed already in Iowa, the Iowa Community Rights Network, or it's forming. And the idea is to have a network in different towns in Iowa, different counties in Iowa, that help groups get off the ground. They give them the benefit of their experience and their knowledge and what's worked for them. They coordinate, support. Eventually, you work to change state law and the state constitution. Until you drive this all the way to the constitutional level, the fight won't stop. And then the third, Colorado, I just wanted to mention. A kind of exactly on this line, faster than anyone thought would happen. That doesn't mean it's in the bag, but nevertheless, people thought phase 2, this whole thing moving toward a state amendment, that's going to take, whatever, a certain number of years of continuing to work at the local level. Well, Colorado jumped the gun, and they have drafted with CELDEF and managed to get, as far as I have been told, managed to get on the ballot in November this coming November, a constitutional amendment for Colorado. And if you don't mind, I'll just read a little of it because it's so incredible. So this is the language of the proposed amendment. The right of the people to local self-government. As all political power is vested in and derived from the people, and as all government of right originates from the people have an inherent and inalienable right to local self-government, including in each county, city, town, and any other municipal subdivision or other local community within the state. That right shall include, without limitation, the power to enact local laws protecting health, safety, and welfare by recognizing the fundamental rights of people, communities, and the natural environment, and by securing those rights using prohibitions and other means, and the power to enact local laws establishing, defining, altering, or eliminating the rights, powers, and duties of for-profit business entities operating or seeking to operate in the community, to prevent such rights and powers from usurping or otherwise conflicting with the fundamental rights of people, their communities, and the natural environments. And finally, local laws adopted pursuant to this right shall not be subject to preemption by international, federal, or state laws, nor shall they be subject to limitation pursuant blah, blah, blah. So, this language is the kind of thing that CELDEF excels at. These guys are really, really sharp, and they've been working on this for a long time. It's not just, let's string together a bunch of things that really are inspiring either. I mean, they're very carefully crafted as to what they're framing. Yeah?
Don't you think there's a kind of a problem there? It says for-profit business entities, because there are like large universities and things that could trample on local rights too.
That's true. It's an interesting point. Interesting point that they went that way. I don't know.
Tom, the wording of that, I wonder about. Because it seems to me that, you know, obviously there's all kinds of things that we're in favor of that this addresses, and that's really great. But what about things that are really, truly wrong? I could imagine, for example, a community of people who are all pedophiles deciding that it's legal in their community despite international, federal, and state laws.
Yeah, I don't think this is throwing out all laws. Obviously, you couldn't, I mean, to take it even further, you couldn't have a community that decides that murder is, they could go to other communities and just kill all of them. You can't, clearly, whether this is the right language or not, I don't know, but I think clearly it's only rights that are yeah, I don't know, I can't answer that as a
Well, it says right there, protecting the health, safety, and welfare.
Right.
Yeah.
So that,
Not the predilections and the perversions of the...
Well, but the problem is that, I mean, there are people who claim that pedophilia is natural.
Yeah.
You know, the problem is that, you know.
Well, I also don't think you could probably have a local ordinance that says you don't have to stop at a stop sign or something.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how to parse all that, but this is a really good point.
That's what I'm up against. I mean, because I'm powerfully in favor of the democratic message.
Yeah.
You know, but it seems to me that you don't always get what you want.
Yeah.
Could I asked Thomas Lindsay this question when he came, and because I was concerned that there might be some groups that would ask some things that maybe the rest of the country wouldn't be that comfortable with. He said, this is the risk with this approach. And he said, and then there's no guarantee with this approach that everybody's gonna, you know, make the most life-supporting rules, but it's just, that's
a great point.
He said communities will have to duke it out too. That was his words, to figure that out.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
However, what happens is usually in such situations that as soon as people start getting involved and they start discussing their rights and the ideas and the opinions, how they want to live, that they will develop a certain level of common sense and countries, for example, where people haven't had any wars and any awful disasters like civil strife and stuff like that, by experience in those countries, people become more and more like understanding towards the feelings of others and more like enshrining the rights of everybody instead of doing something really extreme. Those extreme things usually happen in countries where people have no experience with democracy, where they have never really had the right or the experience to discuss things together. Usually it's like a common sense prevails after a while. And there are examples like, for example, Switzerland or Sweden, countries like that, you know, where this time there is less and less violence and democracy works. It's just, it doesn't happen immediately, you know. It's like people have to get used to use their brain and to use their feelings, their hearts.
I have a question about the preemption, or related to that. The U.S. military is the largest polluter in this country, and they are not subject to any environmental protection laws. And the federal government decides where nuclear waste is dumped. And even things like Los Alamos National Lab and Sandia Labs in New Mexico are kind of notorious for radiation leaks. I spent 13 years living in New Mexico. So does this have enough teeth to protect those communities if they decide that they need to take this action? It sense protect them from the decisions of the federal government.
That's the ultimate, isn't it? That's the ultimate entity. And I don't know. And certainly, even if it can't, it still could be a great step forward, even if it can't go all the way.
Yeah, even to bring this into the public view with a major case of some kind.
It appears to me that the strategy is to appeal to something which will be generally accepted even by those who would otherwise reflexively oppose the idea of excluding CAFOs or excluding fracking or whatever, that trying to frame it in such a way that they can't really say that they're against it because there's a part of them that is for it.
Well, that's right, and it has been said that, in a way, as just what you're saying, the essence of, if you just strip it all away and talk about some of the essence of this, it would appeal more to a conservative than it would to a liberal, because it's all about rights, individual rights, you know, and so it does have that cross appeal.
And so that would imply that as the general process of awakening occurs, then people who might otherwise oppose it would have more access to part of them that is in tune with it.
Right, and that also leads to the idea that Fred Rosenberg was interested in this, and others are, that when it comes to political candidates coming forth and for election, one can probe very deeply where they stand on certain things, and some of the things they can't say no to. You know, so if you get into a public place and say, you know, you start asking them about where they stand on these rights and these rights, you know, they can't say no.
But this whole strategy requires that the people be educated. For example, if you take this into Afghanistan, and the people might decide to have 5-year-old brides in their community.
In Iran, they're going to lower the age for consent to 9 years old. It's 13 right now. So I'm just saying, you know, what she's saying is like, if you're going to give the masses power like that, who knows what they'll do?
That's true. Who knows what they'll do?
They might reestablish slavery or something. You know?
In a very local area.
Yeah, a local area.
Now it's widespread.
The point is, you know, somebody pointed out that, you know, the words health, safety, and welfare, but somebody has to define them.
Yeah. Well, if Richard Walbaum was here, he would define them.
But, you know, the point is that the reason why we have a hierarchical structure of government, one of the reasons why we have it, is because there are arbiters at higher levels. They can say, no, wait a minute, you can't have the age of consent at 9
Well,
years
see,
old.
you know, no one here is talking about getting rid of the Supreme Court or changing the hierarchical structure of government. It's really all about, there are certain areas of health and welfare where the people have to be able to decide, and something's stopping them, and what is that? It's primarily not the federal government poking around particularly. It's usually just, there have been these structures set up, which are corporate inspired. That's what it's about, but you're right, these issues are really fascinating.
Oh, I have one question. I just don't understand.
Could you stand up and then everyone will hear you?
I just don't understand how.
Stand up so your voice
loudly.
Speak loudly.
I just don't understand how corporations can get, if they are persons, that they can get away with rights which a person wouldn't have. For example, if I would go and I would pollute like half of Jefferson County, you know, I mean, they would get after me. and so how come that a person, which is a corporation, can do that?
Well, the reason is because of commerce, because there's a deep strand, a vein of the importance of commerce, interstate commerce and so forth in the Constitution. And as Lindsay would say, it's in the DNA, unfortunately, of our legal structure, that it ends up producing that, because if you say that commerce must be protected, that's what it's based on. You go, see, we're not protecting your commerce or this big deal of your commerce, but if there's a big corporation whose commerce is being completely cut off, that violates the way things have been interpreted.
So in other words, commerce is trumping protecting nature.
Yeah.
And of course, we want it to be the other way around.
Right.
Is trumping our
Can you
welfare.
finish with your presentation?
Now let me finish, and then we'll keep talking, okay?
Can I just ask, is common law more supportive of what we're looking for here, or does it also have problems?
I don't know. I don't have to answer that about common law.
You're not knowledgeable about it?
No. So let me finish up, and then we'll open it up. Whoever needs to leave can leave. So phase 3, of course, is federal action. You start coordinating state networks, and in fact, 8 different state networks of this Community Rights Alliance have just had their first federal conference call. So it's just starting to percolate, where they start to coordinate at a higher level. And of course, ultimately it's driving towards a United States constitutional amendment, because that's the only thing that will be able to roll back some of these skewing factors that have happened over the years. It's not going to be easy by any stretch. And as we know, historically, the biggest changes in terms of rights have only been driven into our society through the Constitution, whether it be, you know, the rights of women to vote, whether it be civil rights and the freedom of the slaves and the blacks. Constitution is where you have to go if you want to fundamentally define a right that has not been acknowledged before. So that's where it's shooting, and that's where it has to go. Now, briefly, I want to tell to you about what's going on up in Decorah, because I was 2 weeks ago. I went up for an intensive weekend experience with Paul Cienfuegos, whose picture you saw at the beginning a few ago. It was a fantastic group facilitator and organizer. Anyway, here's some things that have happened. Here's the history of what's going on in Decorah. So in May, less than a year ago, they had their first We the People workshop. That's what Paul Cienfuegos calls it. So they invited him in. In June, they started having living room conferences where they invited friends, you know, rather than just saying, oh, we'll have a meeting at the library, you actually invite them into your home, saying, come on over. You know, so you have a little more leverage to get a few friends and start talking about this stuff. In September, they had their second We the People conference. So a new crop of people came in and heard it. In November, they had the Democracy School, which is Thomas Lindsay's, which is CELDEF's group. We had one here as well. And that's actually a prerequisite for a town that CELDEF will seriously engage with. They want to know that there's a group of people that have been through that and have a certain grounding in you know, how they see things, so that they can then move forward. So we have already qualified here in Jefferson County for CELDEF's attention, which they give us for free. We've had a number of... The Democracy School is not free. You pay their expenses, which, you know, whatever it costs, typical seminar kind of thing. But everybody doesn't need to take that. And then...
When was that, and how many people attended?
20 people attended.
Here
I don't
in
know,
Fairfield.
yeah, I don't know what they limited to.
Okay.
Paul's thing's limited to about 30 as a rule, so they keep them small sometimes. Although actually I think CELDEF had a very big Democracy School, so they might not keep them small.
And when was it?
And that was actually
September 2012.
yeah, more than a year ago, a year and a half. So in February, they had finished a lot of the work, that is the organizing, the community building, and they presented their ordinance to the supervisors last month, a few weeks ago. In March, the editor of the Decorah paper came out strongly and by surprise in favor, saying the supervisors should pass this law. So that was a great coup.
What was the issue, Tom?
It's frac sand mining. It's not fracking. Many of you probably know that one of the ingredients in the magic stuff that they inject into the earth, besides chemicals and water, is usually a certain kind of sand, which they can manufacture. It has to have a certain quality to it, particle size, etc., uniformity, whatever. So they can manufacture it at great cost, but there are certain places in the country where it exists naturally. And so in the driftless region of northeast Iowa, southwest Wisconsin, a little bit of Minnesota, driftless is where, you know, the glaciers didn't come the last time or whatever. Anyway, the nature of the land there is that there are vast deposits of sand that is perfect for fracking. And so they don't frack there because there's no particular degree of gas there, but they want to mine the sand. And to mine it, you basically have to desolate and strip huge areas because it's only so deep, so you just take it. And the trucks roll and roll, and you're stripping the landscape. And so this frac sand mining.
And there's a health problem too, Tom, right?
With the duster.
Yeah.
frac sand mining creates a lot of dust, silicon in the air, because these mines are open pit mines. And the trucks are uncovered when they travel. And the dust is breathed by animals and children and people, and it creates silicosis and cancer and so on.
Worth stopping.
And then on March 3rd, in March they had the third We the People workshop, which is the one I went up for. So here's how Decorah organizes quickly. For those of you who are great community organizers, this is just 101, but this is what they do. So every Thursday, they have a core group of about 10 people, and then the actual constituent of that group can change from time to time, obviously. But they meet, and they do the next steps, they set goals and commitments for the next meeting, they keep rolling. They attend, they send someone to every county supervisor meeting, just so that they become known and a presence, get to know them, see how they work. They did a massive campaign of letters to the editor. In a small town like that, they tend to print a lot of the letters they get. Even, they have to be a little bit different, whatever, different angles. But they did a big campaign, and they didn't stop. They didn't just send one or two. It was this, and that's why it was a surprise. They didn't have a relationship particularly with the editor of the paper, but probably in part because of all these letters that were coming through and that were printed in his paper that he read and knew about, besides other things they knew about, he became extremely positive for their efforts. They've got a petition drive going, which not only shows support to the supervisors, but also is a great way to get people in the community involved. They at least get exposed to it in larger and larger numbers. That something's going on. They've, of course, doing the social media. They've got a Facebook and a site and a blog. Every 2 days or so, they keep it lively with posts and pictures and human things so that it's in the stream constantly. They have a group of volunteers who help people who maybe don't want to do so much political organizing and that kind of work. They can help with other things. They have events. They need people just to help out to make the thing go. They have living room meetings where they invite people. And on first Thursdays of the month, they have open sessions. Besides these, every Thursday they have the core group that's actually doing the business. They have an open session where they invite the broader public. And they're good at getting a diverse support, which we have not got yet, as you can see looking around the room. Now, that's not because we've tried really hard and failed. We just haven't tried hard yet. And we have to. And they even go and they practice their short speeches because, people say, well, what are you doing? Or, and you meet someone on the street or something, you have to be able to say in a nutshell something that's really powerful. And so they practice it and they use devil's advocates. They bring in Hal Massover and he brings up tough questions. They do that. So this is the kind of thing they do. They're real serious about it. This is the group. Different ages, students, older people. This is the fabulous Liz Ross, who's really the motive force or the animal behind this whole thing. And she's also doing things in the co-op up there. She's just part of Decorah, but she's really important. So they got a whole, this is just some of them, but these are the kind of people who are working together. So in Jefferson County, in September of 2012, there was a democracy school, and Thomas Lindsay himself ran it, which he doesn't always do anymore. So that was powerful. And then a year later, he came back to Dalby Hall, and that's probably where most of you saw him. As you see, that's a year there. That's a long time. So we're moving at a more royal pace here in Jefferson County. Since then, we've had quite a number of group meetings. Different groups have been meeting, different subgroups, and we, among other things, chose a first focus, and that was, our choice at this time was the CAFO threat. And we've been drafting a Community Bill of Rights and County Ordinance. Did a lot of work on that, sent it to CELDEF, and again, they work with us for free. We've had 2 very extended conference calls with Ben Price, who's a great organizer, at CELDEF. And he's been refining is the word, I guess, drastically refining our work and making it more in tune with the kind of thing we've been talking about tonight. Sort of a known formula of greater success and proper framing of the issues. But he's respecting our points as well. But so that's what we've done. But it's time to kick it into higher gear, because this may not be fast enough or strong enough of a community effort so far. It might be, that's something subject for discussion or debate, but it's certainly not the trajectory that Decorah has chosen to be on. So the next steps are to finish the ordinance that's well on its way, do a lot of community outreach and education. That's something we're going to have to brainstorm about and really master and make it happen. Gain the broad support and get the ordinance passed, one way or another.
City or county level?
County, well, we're talking Jefferson County, I believe.
There's another more specific, smaller, maybe perhaps more attainable focus that we could choose here. The ash trees are dying, and there is some poison that can be poured into the ground to protect your trees on your property. And the city council actually moved to pass an ordinance to ban the pouring of this poison into our ground on private property. And then they said, we can't do this because there's a state law that prevents it. And so then they kind of backed down. So instead of backing down, perhaps we could encourage them, don't back down. Right. Say, hey, no, we don't want this. The state wants to argue with us, fine. We're making a law. So that would be a very specific thing. It wouldn't be like this big CAFO thing. It would be like, it might be something that could actually happen. Right. Because they don't have to be persuaded about anything. They already passed, I believe unanimously, that they don't want this stuff poured in the ground.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because you have to choose your battles, because I think that's a great example of this type of thing. It's you have to choose the battles because there's a limited. If you peppered a lot of things like this, came out with a bunch of ordinances, and then had to field multiple lawsuits from the state that would be tough for anyone. So that's why probably a lot of these local areas make the hard choice of, well, sometimes it's not a hard choice, it's really obvious. They're destroying us with this, we have to do this. But sometimes you have to make the hard choice of which one do we want to really go for, and which one will go.
Well, the thing is that the city council actually is already behind.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. They don't have to be
persuaded.
That's a very good, strong point.
There.
That's good. Bill?
Do we have any idea of how our county supervisors feel about this?
No, because we haven't done the work. At least I say we haven't. I may be wrong, but I think that's my perception. So.
And
I invited all three of them tonight.
And hypothetically, if the county wasn't necessarily in favor, but Fairfield was, could an ordinance be passed at the municipal level?
You can. It depends on what the issue is. The idea of a CAFO within Fairfield city limits is extremely unlikely. Right. So it wouldn't be the CAFO issue.
There'd be some other issue.
There's other issue. There are obviously other issues in Fairfield. Yeah.
Through this whole period where we've met for many, many months, we looked at all sorts of issues that we would feel was the best way, to go and have the most impact. And we had small groups, and then we got together with bigger groups. We did a lot of vetting of a lot of different issues. And because of the input that we got from everyone, we felt like the CAFO issue at this point, because there is such a threat right now growing again, was probably the best one to go with, and that going with it on the county level was likely the best one to go with for a lot of different reasons. So I just want to mention that there was just a lot of thought that went into a lot of discussion, like weeks and weeks and weeks of discussion that went into coming up with this one.
And one advantage too with the CAFO issue is Diane being the executive director of JFAN, there's a tremendous amount of knowledge about that issue and about the challenges and about the harms that are deep in our community already. So we have a great resource there, a deep resource.
And it's a broad issue, it's an issue that's...
Right, the county cares about.
Yeah.
The county might not care as much about, well, it wouldn't be a county issue with the Astridge,
Right.
but that,
Yeah, so the long-term strategy is if you win on the CAFO issue, so let's say you win on that outer circle, the people's rights, they stand up, the court, and then they sue us, and the court states, goes with our plan, and we don't appeal and all of that. So we've won that issue. So I guess you're saying that then the next issue that comes up, you can go back to that same strategy.
Absolutely.
And say, and it'll be an easier road. Is that what
absolutely.
Is that what you're talking
Yeah,
about?
yeah. So this last word here.
Repeat.
Repeat. You all listen, then you do it again.
So as an example, if there was a CAFO ordinance, the Ashford thing would apply to that ordinance about quality of life. It could.
The same rights, some of the same rights, absolutely.
It could.
You've already determined that these rights are important, and here's another instance. Okay, almost out of here. And maybe we are out of here, let's see. So, yeah, we're done. So we start local, we build public awareness, and we dismantle corporate rule. I sort of boldly tried to rechristen our group as the Community Rights Alliance of Jefferson County. I don't know that it's officially rechristened. Decorah calls themselves the Community Rights Alliance of Winterset County. I just thought that that's something that could universally be used. So we the people join us, and join us means in any capacity, and please do sign up if you're at all interested in being even just informed about ongoing activities, or if you want to jump in.
By the way, the telephone conversations we've had with CELDEF and Ben Price have been recorded, and if you leave your email address, we'll make sure that you have the URL for those so you can listen to them, because they're pretty